I've been the caretaker at Lake Stillwater for 6 years. It's a quiet job, maintaining the small cluster of rental cabins, fixing docks, and making sure guests don't leave trash behind. I'd never imagined it would lead me to question my own sanity. The lake sits nestled in a valley 3 hours from the nearest major city. Cell service is spotty at best. Most visitors come for the isolation, for a chance to disconnect and enjoy the pristine water. The lake is unusually deep for its size, over 200 feet at its center, and known for its remarkable clarity. It began last October, when I was closing up the property for winter. Most lakes in northern Michigan freeze solid by mid-November, and Lake Stillwater is no exception. I was checking cabin 4 for any forgotten items when I heard a splash from the direction of the dock. Strange, I thought. The last guest had departed 3 days earlier, and I hadn't seen any cars come down the access road. The splash came again, not the gentle lapping of waves against the shore, but the distinctive sound of something breaking the surface. Through the cabin window, I scanned the lake. The water was still except for concentric ripples spreading from a point about 50 yards offshore. Something had definitely gone in, or come out. I grabbed my jacket and headed down to investigate. The air had that crisp, pre-winter bite, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the water. As I approached the shore, I spotted something floating near the dock, a waterlogged notebook with a blue cover. I fished it out with a branch and found a name inside the front cover, Andrea Klein. The name struck me immediately. Andrea Klein had been a guest at Cabin 4 2 summers ago. I remembered her clearly, mid-30s, quiet, always alone with her camera and sketchbooks. She'd stayed for 3 weeks, longer than most guests. The last week of her stay, she'd become agitated, claiming someone was entering her cabin at night and moving her things. I checked the locks, found nothing amiss, and chalked it up to the isolation playing tricks on her mind. She left suddenly one morning without checking out properly. When I entered her cabin, I found her suitcase still there, clothes neatly folded inside. Her car was gone, but her laptop and camera remained on the desk. I reported it to the sheriff, but after some investigation, they concluded she'd simply left and would return for her belongings. She never did. Opening the notebook, I found page after page of detailed drawings of the lake. The early sketches showed peaceful scenes, sunrises over the water, a heron on the far shore, the silhouette of pines against twilight. But as I flipped through, the drawings became darker, more frantic. The final pages showed distorted figures beneath the water's surface, human shapes with elongated limbs and featureless faces reaching upward. The last entry, dated July 16th, 2 years prior, read only, "They're not reflections. They're watching us from below." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I looked out at the still water, noticing how perfectly it reflected the surrounding trees and sky. Had Andrea discovered something in the lake? Had she gone in? If so, why was her notebook suddenly surfacing now, bone-dry despite having just emerged from the water? I took the notebook back to my cabin and called Sheriff Denton. He seemed uninterested, suggesting the notebook had probably been tucked away somewhere and blown into the lake recently. When I mentioned Andrea's disappearance, he sighed. "We looked into that, Jim. She used her credit card at a gas station in Traverse City the day after she left your place. Then again in Chicago a week later. She just skipped out without her things. Some people do that, running from something in their lives." I wanted to believe him, but the timing was too strange. That night, I pored over the notebook again. In the margins of one page, Andrea had scribbled coordinates. I pulled up a map of Lake Stillwater and plotted them. They marked the deepest part of the lake. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept thinking about those drawings, those reaching figures. Around 2 a.m., I was startled awake by a tapping at my window. Tap. 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 Mechanical and precise. I pulled back the curtain but saw nothing, just my own reflection in the glass, distorted by darkness. The next morning dawned clear and cold. I decided to take the small motorboat out to the coordinates Andrea had marked. I told myself it was simply to put my mind at ease, to confirm there was nothing unusual in that part of the lake. The water was glass calm as I cut across it. When I reached the spot, I cut the engine and let the boat drift. The depth finder showed 220 feet, the bottom far beyond visibility despite the lake's clarity. I leaned over the side, studying the surface. That's when I noticed something odd. My reflection wasn't quite right. When I raised my right hand, the reflection raised its left. When I leaned forward, it leaned back slightly. Subtle discrepancies, easy to miss if you weren't paying close attention. I jerked back from the edge, my heart pounding. The boat rocked slightly, water lapping against the hull. It's just the light, I told myself. Just the current moving the boat. I was about to start the engine when I saw something white floating just beneath the surface. A pale, slender hand, reaching upward. Then it vanished. I scrambled for the starter cord, yanking it hard. The engine sputtered but didn't catch. I pulled again, frantic now. On the third try, it roared to life, and I sped back to shore, not looking behind me. That night, the tapping came again. Tap. 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 This time, when I looked, I saw a face in the glass, a woman's face, vaguely familiar yet distorted, as if viewed through rippling water. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. I didn't sleep at all. In the morning, I decided to drive into town for breakfast, needing to be around normal people, needing to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. At the local diner, I ran into Bill Harmon, who'd been fishing these waters for over 60 years. I casually asked if he'd ever noticed anything unusual about Lake Stillwater. The old man's weathered face grew serious. You mean the reflections? My blood ran cold. What about them? Bill leaned in, lowering his voice. There's a reason local folks don't swim in the deep part. Years back, my father told me how the Ojibwe would never fish there. They called it the mirror that lies. Said the reflections weren't reflections at all, but another world watching us. That's just superstition, I said, not believing my own words. Bill shrugged. Maybe. But ask yourself this. Have you ever seen a leaf fall onto the water at Stillwater and disturb the surface? Have you ever noticed how sometimes your reflection moves just a hair before you do? I returned to the lake with growing unease. Standing on the main dock, I studied my reflection in the water. It matched my movements perfectly. But then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it, a slight delay, almost imperceptible, as if my reflection were mimicking me rather than actually reflecting me. I threw a stone into the water. It hit with a splash, but instead of ripples spreading outward as physics demanded, the disturbance seemed to sink straight down, as if pulled. The surface smoothed unnaturally fast. That night, the tapping was louder. Tap. 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 The face at the window was clearer now, definitely a woman, definitely familiar. Andrea. Her eyes were wide, her mouth forming the same words over and over. I couldn't hear her, but I could read her lips. They took me. They're coming for you next. I packed my truck at dawn, throwing in essential belongings. As I was loading the final bag, I glanced toward the lake and froze. Standing on the shore was a figure, humanoid but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, its proportions slightly askew. Its skin had the pale, bloodless look of something that lived without sunlight. When it turned its head toward me, I saw its face, my face, but with eyes too large, a mouth too wide. A reflection given flesh. It took a step forward, movement jerky and uncoordinated, as if it were still learning how to exist in our world. Behind it, the surface of the lake rippled, and more figures began to emerge, dozens of them, each one a distorted copy of a different person. Former guests. Former caretakers. One looked like Andrea. I didn't hesitate. I jumped in my truck and sped away, gravel spraying behind me. In my rearview mirror, I saw them standing motionless on the shore, watching me go, not pursuing. They didn't need to. They had the lake, and the lake had patience. I drove straight to Sheriff Denton's office and told him everything. He listened with growing concern, not for the lake, but for my mental state. He suggested I take some time off, see a doctor. When I insisted we go to the lake together, he reluctantly agreed. We arrived just before sunset. The lake was as I'd always known it, serene, reflecting the fiery sky like a perfect mirror. No figures stood on the shore. My cabin was undisturbed. Even Andrea's notebook, which I'd left on the table in my panic, was gone. "Jim," the sheriff said gently, "I think you've been working too hard. This place can get to people who spend too much time alone." I nodded, embarrassed yet still certain of what I'd seen. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I just need a break." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Take a few days in town. I'll have Deputy Mercer check on the place." I agreed, but as the sheriff walked back to his cruiser, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. His reflection in the lake didn't match his movements exactly. It turned to look at me while the real sheriff continued walking away. I've been staying in a motel in town for 3 days now. I called the property management company and quit. They were understanding. Caretakers rarely last more than a few years at Stillwater. Last night, I woke to a familiar sound. Tap. 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 On the motel window, a wet handprint appeared, though there was no rain. Then another. And another. Leaving perfect impressions that slowly dripped down the glass. In the morning, the manager asked about the mess on my window. "Looks like someone splashed water all over it," he said. "Inside and out." This afternoon, I tried to leave town, but my truck wouldn't start. The mechanic can't find anything wrong with it. "These things happen," he said with a shrug. "I keep seeing puddles of water following me around town. Small ones at first, appearing in odd places, under a chair at the diner, beside my bed, in front of doors I need to open. Growing larger each time. The lake is calling me back. I can feel it. And I'm starting to think I don't have a choice. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what happens at Lake Stillwater. If you're reading this and I've gone missing, don't look for me in the lake. Don't look at your reflection in the water. And whatever you do, don't go out to those coordinates. Because the thing about reflections is this: they're supposed to mimic us. But at Lake Stillwater, we're the ones being mimicked. We're the reflections. And the things below have grown tired of staying on their side of the mirror." The moment we pulled into Pine Lake's deserted parking lot, I knew we'd made a mistake. The brochure had promised pristine wilderness and crystal waters, but failed to mention the oppressive silence that hung over the place like a shroud. "This is it?" my girlfriend Rachel asked, squinting through the windshield at the murky green water surrounded by dense pine forest. "Doesn't exactly look like the resort photos. Off-season discount," I reminded her. 4 days of peace and quiet. No self-service, no interruptions. As we unloaded our camping gear, I noticed a figure watching us from the tree line, tall, motionless, almost blending into the shadows. The forest ranger, according to the wooden sign we passed, though his uniform looked decades out of date. "Can I help you folks?" His voice startled us. He'd covered 50 yards without making a sound. Up close, he was unsettling, gaunt face, hollow cheeks, eyes that didn't seem to blink enough. His ranger badge was tarnished, the name, Garrett, barely legible. "Just setting up camp," I said, extending my hand. He didn't take it. "Not many come here in October." His eyes darted between us, then to the lake. "Water's dangerous this time of year. Currents change. Things wash up. We're not planning to swim," Rachel assured him. "Good." He nodded slowly. "Stay away from the shore after dark. I patrol the perimeter each night. Don't be alarmed if you see my flashlight." He retreated into the woods as silently as he'd appeared. Rachel squeezed my arm. "Creepy much? Let's set up far from the water." We chose a spot on higher ground, about 50 yards from the lake. As I hammered in tent stakes, I kept glancing toward the shoreline. Something felt wrong about how still the water was, not a ripple despite the breeze rustling the pines. After sunset, the temperature dropped sharply. We huddled by our campfire, the flames casting our shadows long across the ground. Beyond our small circle of light, The darkness seemed absolute. "There he is again," Rachel whispered, nodding toward the trees. I saw the ranger's silhouette, just standing, watching. When I raised my hand in acknowledgement, he disappeared into the darkness. "He's just doing his job," I said, not believing it myself. Around midnight, we crawled into our tent. Rachel fell asleep quickly, but I lay awake, listening. The usual forest sounds, insects, nocturnal animals, were absent. The only noise was the occasional splash from the lake. Splash. Splash. Then a dragging sound. Curiosity overcame my unease. I unzipped the tent slowly, careful not to wake Rachel, and peered out. The moon provided enough light to see the ranger at the shoreline, bent over something large and pale. He was pulling it from the water, something that looked disturbingly like a body. As if sensing my gaze, he turned sharply toward our camp. I ducked back inside, heart pounding. Morning revealed no evidence of what I'd seen. When I cautiously approached the shore, the muddy bank showed no drag marks, no footprints besides my own. "You're jumpy today," Rachel observed as we prepared breakfast. Before I could respond, the ranger materialized from the tree line. Today, his uniform was soaking wet, though there'd been no rain. "Checking on you folks," he said flatly. "Anyone visit your camp last night?" "No," I answered. "We were alone." "Why?" "Missing camper from up north," he said, eyes scanning the tree line. "Been searching all night." "We didn't see anyone," Rachel said. "Is there something we should know?" His expression remained neutral. "Just keep to yourselves. Don't go in the water." After he left, Rachel turned to me. "I don't like this. That guy gives me the creeps. Let's hike the ridge today," I suggested. "Get away from the lake for a while." The forest trail wound up a steep hillside overlooking Pine Lake. From this height, I noticed something odd, a pattern of disturbance in the otherwise still water, circular ripples spreading from multiple points, as if things were surfacing. When we returned to camp that evening, something had changed. Our tent remained untouched, but our supplies had been rearranged, subtle differences in how our cooking gear was stacked. My backpack moved a few feet from where I'd left it. "Maybe animals," Rachel suggested, but we both knew better. That night, I insisted we keep a stronger fire going. The dancing flames did little to dispel my growing dread. I couldn't shake the image of what I'd seen the ranger dragging from the lake. We were preparing for bed when we heard a scream, distant but distinct, coming from somewhere across the water. A woman's voice, abruptly silenced. "Call 911, Rachel gasped, then remembered. "No service." "I'll get the ranger," I said, grabbing my flashlight. I followed the shore, sweeping my beam across the dark water. The reflection caught something, several somethings, moving beneath the surface. Not fish. Too large, too deliberate in their movements. I found the ranger's cabin half a mile down the shore. No lights were visible inside, but smoke rose from the chimney. I knocked repeatedly, receiving no answer. Circling around back, I peered through a grimy window. The interior was sparse. A cot, a table strewn with papers, walls covered with missing persons flyers. Dozens of them, dating back decades. Many faces were circled in red. As I leaned closer, I noticed something on the table that made my blood freeze. Photographs of Rachel and me, taken from a distance as we'd hiked that afternoon. A splash from the lake made me turn. The ranger was emerging from the water, completely clothed, dragging something behind him. In the dim moonlight, I saw it was a body, a female hiker, her face pallid, limbs limp. I ducked into the shadows, watching in horror as he hauled her toward the cabin. Her arm flopped lifelessly, but then, impossibly, her fingers twitched. Her eyes opened, milky white and unseeing yet aware. I ran, branches whipping my face, panic giving me speed. I had to get back to Rachel, to warn her. Our campsite was empty when I returned, the tent unzipped, the fire dying. Rachel's flashlight lay on the ground, still on, pointing toward the lake. "Rachel!" I shouted, scanning the shoreline. Then I saw them, figures emerging from the water. 3, 4, 5 pale shapes, limbs stiff yet moving, headed toward our camp. Their faces were wrong, bloated and slack, eyes clouded, yet somehow fixed on me with terrible purpose. Among them was the ranger, no longer pretending to be human. His uniform hung in tatters from gray flesh that had clearly been submerged for years, not hours. "We've been so lonely." His voice gurgled, water spilling from his mouth with each word. "The lake preserves us, but we need new friends. Your Rachel is joining us now." I spotted her then, being pulled into the lake by pale hands, weakly struggling against the grip of what had once been campers, hikers, visitors who'd gotten too close to Pine Lake after dark. I ran toward them, screaming her name. Too late. She disappeared beneath the surface with barely a ripple. The waterlogged figures turned toward me with patient, terrible smiles. I fled into the forest, blind with terror. Somehow I found the main road, flagged down a passing truck. The driver took one look at my face and stepped on the gas. The authorities found nothing at Pine Lake, no ranger's cabin, no missing persons flyers, no sign of Rachel. They suggested she'd gone swimming alone, despite the prominent, "no swimming," signs. They pointed out there hadn't been an official ranger stationed at Pine Lake for over 20 years, not since a tragic drowning incident claimed 6 lives, including the ranger who'd tried to save them. I know what lives in Pine Lake now. I recognize their strategy: isolate, separate, submerge. The lake preserves what it takes, corrupting flesh and purpose alike. Sometimes I receive postcards from remote wilderness locations, always featuring lakes. They're signed with Rachel's name, but the handwriting isn't hers. The messages are always the same. "The water is perfect. You should come join us. We miss you so much." The paper is always damp to the touch. The lake was the only reason people stayed in Drownhill. It wasn't beautiful. The water carried a dull, iron sheen most days, and the banks smelled faintly of decay. But the lake had a pull. It held the town like a lung holds air, reluctantly, tightly. No one could say why they stayed. They just didn't leave. Claire arrived in early April, sent to live with her aunt after a breakup turned ugly. She was 23, living out of a duffel bag, with no job and no real plan. Janine offered the guest room and a few hours at the antique shop, and Claire had nowhere else to go. She accepted, thinking the village would be quiet, a place to heal. On her first night, it rained hard enough to rattle the windows. The walls were thin in Janine's house. You could hear every creak of the old wood. At 3 a.m., Claire woke to something that wasn't wind or thunder, a soft knock at the bedroom window. She stayed still for a long time, listening. Another knock. 3 taps. Slow. Even. She finally stood and pulled the curtain back. There was nothing there. In the morning, she asked Janine if kids in town liked to prank new arrivals. Janine didn't look up from her coffee. "Keep your curtains closed at night. Especially if you're on the lake-facing side." Claire waited for her to laugh. She didn't. Later, Claire asked about the lake. Janine paused, then said, "You were here once before. When you were 6. Your parents brought you." "I don't remember that." They didn't stay long. The village was small. A single road wound through sagging cottages and damp fields. Everyone seemed to know each other. They stared when Claire passed but never said much. A few nodded. Some didn't. She met the man near the post office. Tall, thin, with strange pale eyes that reflected light like an animal's. He stood perfectly still, like something carved. When Claire greeted him, he said nothing. Just stared. She turned away. But as she walked, she realized something unsettling. His feet were bare. The road was full of gravel. At dinner, she told Janine about him. Her aunt's fork paused midair. "Don't talk to him. And don't let him in." Claire blinked. "I didn't plan to. He was never born here. Just showed up one day, said he belonged to the water." It was quiet for a while after that. Claire fell into a routine. Mornings at the shop, long walks, silent dinners. She never went near the lake, though it was always visible at the end of the lane. At night, she kept the curtains closed. But the knocking came again. It started once a week. Then twice. Then every night. 3 soft knocks at the window. Always just after midnight. Always when the house was still. She stopped telling Janine. Her aunt had begun leaving salt at the windowsills and muttering prayers before bed. Claire tried to convince herself it was a bird, a branch, anything. Until the night she saw the footprints. She'd gotten up to use the bathroom. Passed the living room. Noticed the curtain slightly ajar. Drawn by something she didn't understand, she looked outside. The lawn was soaked from earlier rain. And there, in the mud, were prints. Bare feet. Deep. Leading to her window, and back toward the trees. She didn't sleep. She didn't tell Janine. The next day, she walked into town. She needed to feel normal, to hear traffic or laughter or anything other than her own breath. At the diner, the waitress, a sunburned woman with cracked lips, refilled Claire's coffee and asked quietly, "You seen him yet?" Claire hesitated. "The barefoot guy?" The woman nodded once, eyes dropping. "He watches the lake. That's all he does. Watches and waits." "For what?" "Someone to follow him in." Claire tried to leave that day. She packed her things in a frenzy, called for a cab, and stood by the road for 2 hours. No one came. Her phone lost signal. When she returned to the house, Janine didn't ask. She just said, "They don't let you go until you've given something." Claire didn't ask who they were. She didn't want to know. That night, she heard the knocks again. Then the sound of footsteps around the house. Slow. Dragging. As if whoever it was had all the time in the world. When she looked through the curtain, he was there. Not at the window, but in the yard. Facing the lake. Head tilted back like he was listening for something. He turned slowly. His eyes caught the moonlight. Claire froze. He didn't smile. He just raised his hand, palm up, and pointed to the water. Then he waited. She didn't go outside that night. She stood at the window long after he vanished into the trees. Her fingers dug into the windowsill until her knuckles ached. The sound of the lake came in waves, lapping, then silence, then something deeper, like a breath being held beneath the surface. In the morning, Janine was already gone. She left a note on the counter, back by noon. "Don't go near the water." Claire almost laughed. She hadn't planned on it. But by late afternoon, she found herself standing on the dock. The wind was still. The sky a hard, featureless gray. She thought of how she'd ended up here, how everything had unraveled so fast after she left the city. A place she hated, people she didn't miss, and yet the quiet of Drownhill felt more dangerous than anything she'd ever known. There was a ripple near the center of the lake. Then another. She turned to leave. That's when she saw the child. Small. Soaking wet. Standing barefoot at the edge of the tree line, half hidden by reeds. Watching her. Claire froze. "Are you okay?" The child didn't answer. Just pointed to the lake. Then it stepped backward into the trees and was gone. Claire didn't remember walking back. But she remembered what came after. She opened the front door to find Janine in the living room, crying quietly, hands clutched around a damp piece of cloth. When she looked up and saw Claire, her expression didn't change. "You saw them, didn't you?" Claire nodded. Janine wiped her face, stood, and went to the hallway. She returned with an old shoebox. She opened it on the table without a word. Inside were photographs. Dozens. All of them of people at the lake. Some standing on the shore. Some already waist deep in the water. Some staring directly into the camera with hollow expressions. None smiling. She handed Claire one. It was a little boy. Same face, same white hair. The one from the woods. "That's Evan," Janine said. "He was mine." Claire's breath caught. "He was 6. We lived here then, too. Before I understood." Claire stared at the photo. "What happened?" Janine's voice was flat. "He followed something into the lake. They never found a body. Just his boots on the dock." Claire put the picture down, gently, like it might burn her fingers. "Why didn't you leave?" Janine looked out the window. "You can't leave until it's finished." Claire opened her mouth to speak, but Janine raised a hand. "They only come to people who've lost something. That's how they get in. They offer a way back. A glimpse. A voice. It doesn't matter. Once you see them, they know." The rain came again that night, hammering the roof in sheets. Claire didn't close her eyes once. The next day, the barefoot man came to the antique shop. She was alone. Janine hadn't opened. The man walked in slowly, eyes sweeping across the room like he was reading a map. Claire didn't speak. He didn't either. He stopped in front of a glass case and pointed at something inside. A locket. Old, tarnished. The clasp broken. "Whose was it?" he asked. His voice was softer than she expected. "I don't know," she said. "You do," he said. "You wore it when you were here last." Claire stared at him. "I was 6. "Yes," he said. "And they let you go." "But not completely." She didn't remember much from that summer. Only a vague smell of rot and water lilies. A dream she'd had for years afterward of someone calling her name from beneath a dock. "I never went into the water," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said. "You only have to listen." Claire took a step back. The man didn't follow. He only smiled, then turned and walked out the door. His feet left no prints on the floor. That night, Janine nailed shut the window frames, salted the doors, lit a candle in every room. "They're getting closer," she said. "You shouldn't have followed them." Claire sat on the couch, staring at her hands. They smelled faintly of algae. "Why me?" Janine looked at her. "Because you came back." At midnight the power went out. Not with a flicker or a hum. Just a sudden absence. The candles blew out on their own. And then came the sound. From the walls. From beneath the floor. Water sloshing. Gurgling. A slow, steady drip. Claire stood, heart hammering. She grabbed a flashlight, but the beam only lit a few feet ahead. The front door creaked open. She turned slowly. The barefoot man stood there, soaked, unmoving. Behind him, shapes shifted in the dark. Janine screamed something, words that sounded old, sharp, not English. But Claire stepped forward. She didn't want to. Her legs didn't feel like hers. He raised his hand. "Come see," he said. And she did. Out the door. Down the hill. To the edge of the lake. Where the lights waited. They'd planned the trip for weeks. A weekend escape. No phones, no reception, no stress. Just 4 old friends, a couple of tents, and a quiet lake in upstate New Hampshire. The kind of place where your voice gets swallowed by the trees. Daniel was the one who pushed for it. He said they needed to reconnect, like they used to in college. No one argued. They were all frayed in their own ways. Scott was going through a divorce, Marcus had just lost his job, and Ryan hadn't responded to a group text in over a month. They arrived late Friday afternoon, their cars heavy with gear and silence. The campground was nearly empty. Just a ranger station, a map pinned to a rotting corkboard, and a path down to Lake Greywash. Daniel insisted on a spot close to the water. "The best sunrises," he said. Ryan barely nodded. He looked thinner than last year. Paler. He carried only one bag. They pitched tents. Built a fire. Drank warm beer and laughed too loudly about old things they didn't quite find funny anymore. By 10 p.m., the woods were black. Soundless, except for the water and the distant crack of branches. Scott kept glancing toward the lake. "It's so damn quiet," Marcus grunted. "That's the point." Daniel raised a can. To silence, then. But Ryan didn't drink. He just stared across the water, toward the opposite bank, where something, not light, exactly, but movement, shifted in the shadows. "Thought I saw someone," he muttered. The others followed his gaze. Nothing there. Just dark trees and their own reflections. Daniel threw another log on the fire. You've been off, man. You okay? Ryan flinched. Yeah. Just tired. The night stretched long. One by one, they retreated to their tents. Except for Ryan, who sat by the fire long after it had gone to embers. When Scott got up to pee around 3 a.m., he thought he heard something near the water, like someone dragging a bag across gravel. But when he unzipped his tent and shone his flashlight, the lake was still. The next morning, Ryan was gone. His tent sat untouched. Sleeping bag sealed. His bag was missing. Daniel cursed. Jesus, did he leave? Did he walk out in the middle of the night? They checked the trailhead. No sign of him. No note. Scott's voice was tight. We should call someone. No signal, Marcus said. We'd have to drive back to the main road. Daniel shook his head. Give him a few hours. Maybe he went for a walk. But when they checked the shoreline, they found prints. Barefoot. Leading from Ryan's tent toward the lake. And then nothing. No return trail. No splash. No sign of struggle. Just a patch of reeds pressed flat, like someone had stood there watching the water for a long time. They called out his name. Waited. Nothing. They argued. Blamed each other. Maybe he was suicidal. Maybe he wanted to vanish. But as night fell again, the mood shifted. The lake was still. Too still. Scott went to the ranger station the next morning, but it was empty. Dust on the desk. Coffee mug half full and cold. A printed sheet reading back soon curled up in the window. He radioed for help. No answer. When he returned, Marcus was gone too. His tent was torn down, his bag missing. Daniel sat at the fire pit, unmoving. I didn't hear a thing, he said. He was just gone. Scott checked the shore. Again, those barefoot prints. Same direction. He tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. Later, when he and Daniel went to collect firewood, Scott found something tucked behind a log, a shirt. Ryan's. Damp, rolled tightly, like someone had packed it with care. Inside the shirt was a piece of paper. It had one word, written in shaky ink. Wait. Scott woke with the sensation of something having just left. He blinked into the darkness, the fire dead, the woods around him unnervingly still. The quiet wasn't peaceful, it was loaded, like the moment after a breath is held. He sat up slowly, his lower back stiff from the uneven ground. Daniel? He called, not too loudly. No answer. He rubbed his arms and stood. The temperature had dropped. A sharp coldness clung to the trees, as if the lake exhaled when no one was looking. He moved toward the tents. Daniel's was empty. The flap left open. His bag gone. Daniel? Scott circled the site again, checking the edges, calling out more urgently this time. No sign of him. Only the faintest impression in the grass, an indentation where someone had stood for a while, just watching the water. He turned to the lake. It looked like black oil under the moonlight. Flat and wide. No ripples. No sound. He couldn't explain it, but he felt certain it was aware of him now, and the way a room becomes aware of someone who doesn't belong. He crept to the edge. The mud squelched beneath his boots. Then he saw them, tracks again. Barefoot. Spaced evenly. Walking directly into the water. Like before. Scott stumbled back. This couldn't be coincidence. 3 men don't walk willingly into a lake in the middle of the night without something being wrong. He looked around again. No voices, no footprints returning to shore, no indication of anything resembling a human decision. Just the patient prints of someone who never hesitated. Scott went to the car. He didn't pack. He didn't zip up the tents. He just got in, started the engine, and drove. Hard. Fast. Until the trees broke open into empty road and he could breathe without tasting damp earth. He made it to a small town with a gas station and a 24-hour diner. He parked under the buzzing yellow lights and sat in the car until the shaking in his hands stopped. Then he walked inside, ordered black coffee, and asked where the nearest police station was. The officer was polite. tired but not surprised. Scott told him everything, down to the last detail. When he finished, the officer didn't ask him to repeat anything. Just sat back in his chair and looked like he'd heard it all before. "How long were you out there?" he asked. "2 nights. Did you go swimming?" Scott blinked. "What? In the lake? Did you go in?" "No." "Why does that matter?" The officer leaned forward slightly. "Sometimes people think they see something. Sometimes it's lights. Sometimes it's people. That lake's taken a few." Scott laughed, but it cracked in the middle. "You saying it's dangerous?" "I'm saying it's quiet. Too quiet. Makes people forget who they are." The police sent out a search team. They found nothing. No signs of a struggle. No clothing. No remains. Just one torn notebook near the ashes of the last fire, pages full of drawings. Sketches of the lake at night, the shoreline, a shadowy figure repeated over and over, tall, still, barefoot, watching. The sketch style was different than anything Daniel had ever drawn before. On the final page was one phrase, written in shaky, wet ink. "It knows who listens." Scott went home. He moved to a high-rise apartment 2 hours inland. No lakes. No ponds. He showers with the door open. Keeps the mirror covered. He hasn't spoken to anyone from that trip. There's no one left to speak to. Sometimes, when the power cuts out at night, he thinks he hears water slapping softly against something just outside the building. Not wind. Not plumbing. Just water, waiting. He hasn't slept properly in months. Because in the dark, behind his eyelids, Lake Greywash is always there. Quiet. Perfect. Expecting. And every dream ends the same way. Scott standing at the shoreline. Alone. Shoes off. Looking down at his own footprints, the last in a line of 4. And the water calling his name like it already owns it. No one locked their doors in Lakehurst Pines. Not really. Not the way you were supposed to. Some folks hit the button on their key fob out of habit, but even that felt theatrical. It was the kind of neighborhood where someone always waved, where Christmas lights went up early, where kids biked in loose packs and vanished for hours until dinner time. There was a neighborhood Facebook group, a rotating potluck schedule, and a man on Sycamore Lane who trimmed everyone's hedges for free every spring. And then there was the lake. It sat at the bottom of the hill, wide and still, hemmed in by houses on 3 sides and dense trees on the 4th. It wasn't large enough for boats, barely big enough for paddleboards. But it had a dock, a bench with a plaque, and water that always seemed colder than the air. They called it Mirror Lake. Not officially, that was just what stuck. People said it was named for how calm it stayed, even during storms. You could scream at that water and it wouldn't ripple. Nina and Theo moved in during the 2nd week of August, 1 month before school started. They were young, early 30s, no kids yet, but full of optimism and energy that the neighbors immediately absorbed. There were welcome baskets. Muffins. A hand-painted, Lake Life, sign from someone 2 streets over. Nina loved it. She set up a garden, joined the neighborhood committee, even hosted a wine night before the last box was unpacked. Theo wasn't as social. He worked late and mowed the lawn in headphones. But he smiled when he needed to. Shook hands. Said the right things. The only person who unsettled them was the neighbor across the street. Mr. Alden. He was in his 60s, lived alone, rarely spoke. He didn't come to the potlucks or respond to door knockers. He walked the lake path every morning at exactly 5:30 a.m., always counterclockwise, always alone. And sometimes, only sometimes, he stopped on the far side of the lake and stood still for a long, long time. Watching the water. Theo noticed it first. The standing. He mentioned it to Nina one night offhand during dinner. She shrugged. Old people do weird stuff. But it kept happening. Every day. Same time. Same route. Same pause. One night in early September, Theo had trouble sleeping. He stepped out onto their back deck just after midnight, hoping the air might reset his nerves. That's when he saw the lights. Small. Flickering. Somewhere near the lake's edge. Not streetlights. Not flashlights either. Something dimmer. More natural. Fireflies, maybe? But when he squinted, he saw a person. Standing knee-deep in the water. Just standing. He stayed at the glass door for over a minute, unsure whether to go back in or call someone. By the time he opened the door again, the figure was gone. The next morning, he walked down to the lake. It looked the same as always. The water undisturbed. Except for the footprints. Bare, wide-spaced, leading from the path into the water and ending where the grass turned to mud. That night, he told Nina. She laughed at first. Then, seeing his face, she stopped. "Let's put a camera out," she said. Theo didn't want to. He didn't know why. But she did it anyway, one of those motion-triggered wildlife cams, left near the bench with the plaque. They checked it the next morning. Nothing. And the next? Nothing again. But on the third morning, just after 2 a.m., the camera triggered. The footage was grainy. Black and white. But clear enough. A figure walking toward the lake. Thin. Upright. Paused near the edge. Then, slowly, walked in. Not waiting. Not flinching. Just walking. Until it vanished beneath the surface without a splash. They stared at the screen for a long time. Then Theo opened the front door and looked across the street. Mr. Alden's blinds were open. And he was standing there. Watching their house. His hands perfectly still at his sides. Nina wanted to call the police. Theo didn't. "What are we even reporting?" he asked. "An old man looked at us through his window." She didn't have an answer. But the feeling stayed with her all day, tight in the chest, like a hand slowly closing. When she watered the garden, she felt eyes on her. When she brought in groceries, she triple-locked the door for the first time since moving in. That night, Theo agreed to move the wildlife cam closer to the water, hidden in the trees this time. Just in case. The footage the next morning showed nothing unusual. No visitors. No figures. But the lake looked different. Not the surface. Not the shape. The space around it. More open somehow. As if the trees had inched back. Or the lake had grown. At work, Theo opened Google Maps and tried to compare the satellite view to memory. He couldn't tell. The resolution was too low. But it nagged at him. That night, the camera didn't catch anything. But the morning after, Theo found something odd in the grass near the camera. A handprint. Not in mud, on the grass itself. As if something had pressed down with impossible weight, then lifted again. The print was long. Narrow. Fingers too defined. He didn't tell Nina. That was Saturday. By Sunday, the dog from the house 2 lots down had gone missing. Max, a 12-year-old golden retriever everyone knew, even people who didn't like dogs. His leash was found coiled neatly at the end of the dock. No prints. No signs of a struggle. Just a small patch of wet boards where he might have stood. The Facebook group lit up. People offered prayers, theories. One man suggested coyotes. No one believed him. Mr. Alden didn't comment. He didn't come outside for 2 days. And then, on Tuesday morning, Theo opened his curtains and saw something on their front step. A sealed envelope. No address. He opened it. Inside, a single photograph. Old. Yellowed. 4 people in swimsuits standing by the lake's edge. One man in the background, blurry, standing in the water, facing the wrong direction. Not looking at the camera. Looking deeper into the lake. On the back, someone had written in faded ink. "We only borrowed the surface." Theo called Nina into the room. She stared at the photo. "Is that?" Theo nodded. The man in the background, blurry, but unmistakable, was Mr. Alden. 30 years younger. That night they stayed up, lights on, watching the yard. But no one came. The next day, Theo walked to Mr. Alden's house. Knocked. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. On a whim, he tried the door. It opened. Inside smelled like cedar and rot. The living room was spotless. Furniture old but clean. On the wall, dozens of photographs, framed and dusted. Every one of them showed the lake. But never from the dock. Always from behind trees. Obscured angles. Low to the ground. Every one of them had a figure in the water. Sometimes just a shoulder. A hand. A faint face distorted by ripples. But always someone. He called out again. No response. He backed out, gently closed the door, and walked straight home. That night he didn't sleep. At 3:21 a.m., the motion camera triggered. Theo checked it from his phone. He stared at the screen in the dark. Nina sat up beside him, rubbing her eyes. What? He didn't speak. He just handed her the phone. On the screen. The dock. Empty at first. Then a figure. Walking upright. Into the frame. It paused at the edge of the lake. Turned slowly toward the camera. The face barely visible. But it wasn't Mr. Alden. It was Theo. Wearing the same shirt he was wearing now. And then he walked calmly into the water. No splash. No ripple. Gone. The camera cut out seconds later. Theo didn't move. His hands shook. Nina called his name twice before he answered. I didn't go out there, he said. I didn't leave. She nodded. I know. But when she looked down at his shoes by the bed, they were wet. Mud clung to the soles. Small pine needles were stuck to the laces. Theo didn't sleep the rest of the night. They planned to leave the next day. Sell the house. Go anywhere else. Somewhere dry. Somewhere far from lakes and silence, and too many friendly neighbors. But when morning came, Theo was gone. No footprints. No open doors. Just an empty bed and a pair of soaked shoes. Nina walked the path to the lake. The sun had barely risen. The water was still. She sat on the bench with the plaque and waited. Hours passed. At 11:15 a.m., something moved beneath the surface. Slow. Gentle. She stood. Looked. It wasn't a fish. It was a hand. Pressed flat against the underside of the water, palm up, as if asking for something. When she blinked, it was gone. That night, she slept with all the lights on. No one saw Nina after that. The house went dark. The lawn grew wild. And every morning, just before sunrise, an old woman walks the lake path alone. Counterclockwise. Always alone. And when she stops at the far edge, she stays still for a very long time. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.